I can't open my legs, Cowboy. Massage me. The farm woman's unending pain. The sun had barely begun to rise over the wide fields when Eliza pushed open the old wooden door of her farmhouse. The air was crisp and filled with a smell of damp soil and fresh hay, a smell that had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. She had grown up here, running barefoot through the fields, helping her parents with chores, learning the rhythms of farm life that demanded work from dawn until dusk. But now, in her late 30s, the farm felt heavier. Not just because of the workload, but because her body had started to protest. Eliza had always been strong, or at least she thought she was. She had carried sacks of grain, lifted buckets of water, and tended to the livestock with the same hands that now sometimes shook slightly after long hours. For years she had ignored the occasional aches, telling herself that this was part of life on a farm, but over the past months the pain had grown. It wasn't a simple soreness that went away after rest. It was persistent, deep, and exhausting. Every movement required effort. Every step was a reminder that her body was no longer as forgiving as it once had been. Today was no different. As she stepped outside into the early morning light, she winced. Her legs felt stiff, uncooperative, as if they belonged to someone else. She had trouble bending and stretching, and sometimes even walking to the barn felt like a challenge. But she knew she couldn't stop. The farm demanded her presence. The animals needed food, water, and care, and the crops wouldn't tend to themselves. Eliza started with the chickens, filling their feeders and gathering eggs, her movements careful and deliberate. She had always found a strange peace in these moments. The quiet clucking of hens, the occasional crow of a rooster breaking the dawn silence. But even this simple task felt heavier than usual. Her hands, roughened by years of work, were sore, and her legs trembled as she bent down and straightened up repeatedly. She sighed, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead despite the cool morning air. After the chickens, she moved on to the barn. The cows were next on her list. She greeted them individually, scratching behind their ears, checking their udders, and ensuring each had enough water. The farm had always been her responsibility alone, since her parents had passed away years ago. She loved this life, loved the connection to the land and animals, but the isolation was hard. There was no one to share the burden, no one to take over when her body refused to cooperate. Her mind wandered as she worked. She thought about how much easier things might have been if she had someone to help her, someone to share both the work and the worry. But she had always been independent, proud of her ability to manage the farm alone. Asking for help had never come naturally. Even now, she hesitated, feeling the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her chest. By mid-morning, Eliza's pain had worsened. Her legs felt almost numb, and every step was accompanied by a dull ache that spread from her hips down to her knees. She paused to lean against the barn door, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to catch her breath and calm the rising wave of fatigue. Her body was sending signals she could no longer ignore. Something was wrong, more than just the normal aches of farm life. As she rested, her mind drifted to the memories of her childhood, running freely through these same fields. Back then, her parents had always been there to support her, to lift heavy loads when she was tired, to offer comfort after a long day of work. Now, those comforting presences were gone. The farm, which had once felt like a place of freedom and possibility, now seemed to amplify her struggle. Every morning the sun rose, and she rose with it, but she felt a growing sense of weariness that wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. Eliza shook her head, trying to clear the dark thoughts. She had work to do. There were fields to tend, crops to water, fences to repair. She couldn't afford to let herself be slowed down, not when the farm depended on her. But even as she moved towards the vegetable garden, her body seemed to betray her. Every step required concentration. Every bend and lift required planning. She realized that she had been pushing herself too hard, trying to maintain the same pace as before. Her body was telling her it needed care, but she had no idea how to give it that care without stopping completely, and stopping completely wasn't an option. By late morning, Eliza was exhausted. She paused under the shade of an old oak tree at the edge of the field, leaning heavily against the trunk. She closed her eyes and let the wind brush against her face, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of insects. It was a small comfort, a reminder that life continued even when she felt weighed down by her own struggles. In the quiet moments, she reflected on the life she had chosen. The farm was more than just a place. It was a part of her identity. She had inherited it, nurtured it, and lived every day according to its demands. And yet she couldn't ignore the reality that her body was no longer as strong as her spirit. Something had to change, but she didn't know what. The thought of seeking help made her uneasy. She had spent her whole life managing her own. Could she admit that she needed someone else now? As she leaned against the tree, a small breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and growing crops. It reminded her of why she kept going, why she endured the pain and isolation. This farm was her home, her legacy, and despite the exhaustion and aches, she felt a flicker of determination. She couldn't stop. She wouldn't. She had faced hardships before, and she could face this too. Eliza's gaze fell on the distant horizon, where the sun was climbing higher in the sky. She knew she would have to keep moving, keep working, keep fighting through the pain. The farm demanded it, but more importantly, she demanded it of herself. She took a deep breath, pushed herself away from the tree, and walked slowly back toward the house. She needed to eat, to rest, and to plan the next steps carefully. Her body was telling her a story she could no longer ignore, a story of weariness, strength, and the need for support. By the time she returned to the farmhouse, the sun was high, and the day was in full swing. Eliza moved through her home quietly, preparing a simple meal, tending to the small tasks that kept the household running. She felt the aches in her legs more keenly with every movement, a reminder that she couldn't pretend things were fine. And yet, she also felt a strange sense of hope. Recognizing the problem was the first step to finding a solution, even if the solution was not immediately clear. Sitting at the kitchen table, she rested her hands on the worn wooden surface and closed her eyes. The farm would continue to demand her strength, but she realized that strength alone might not be enough. There were limits to what she could endure by herself, and acknowledging that was not weakness, it was wisdom. She resolved to seek answers, to find ways to care for herself while caring for the land and animals she loved so much. In the distance, the fields stretched endlessly, golden in the sunlight. Eliza opened her eyes and looked out at them, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Life on the farm was hard, unrelenting, and at times lonely, but it was also filled with beauty, purpose, and a sense of belonging that she could not find anywhere else. And so, despite the pain that slowed her steps and the uncertainty that clouded her mind, she rose from the table, ready to face the day, ready to fight for herself and her farm, one careful step at a time. The morning light had grown stronger, spilling over the fields and illuminating every corner of Eliza's farm. She moved slowly, her body complaining with each step, but her mind was determined. Today, she told herself, she would focus on completing a few critical tasks, the ones that could not be postponed. The cows needed milking, the fences required repair, and the garden was beginning to show signs of neglect. Every chore carried its own weight, but now every movement carried the weight of her pain as well.
Eliza began with the cows.
She approached each animal carefully, stroking their heads, whispering soft words to calm them. Despite the ache in her legs, there was a rhythm to her movements that was almost comforting. Years of experience had taught her the motions, and even when her body felt weak, her mind remembered the patterns. But this time, the familiar rhythm was interrupted by sharp twinges of discomfort. She had to pause repeatedly, leaning on the wooden stall gates, breathing deeply to steady herself. The farm had always been a place of solitude, and Eliza had grown accustomed to managing alone. But the loneliness now felt heavier. She missed conversation, even the smallest acknowledgement from another human being that she was not alone in her struggle. Her parents had once been there to share burdens, to offer encouragement, and to remind her that she was not alone. Now, only the animals bore witness to her labor, their quiet presence both comforting and a reminder of her isolation. By late morning, she had completed the milking, but the effort left her exhausted. Her legs felt weak, and each movement seemed to take more energy than it should. She sat on the edge of the barn, wiping sweat from her forehead and listening to the gentle hum of the farm around her. The cows moved quietly in their stalls. The chickens clucked softly, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. In this moment, Eliza felt a deep longing for support, for relief, for someone to share both the work and the pain that had begun to dominate her life. Her mind wandered to the days when neighbors used to stop by. Farm life had been more connected then, a network of people who understood each other's struggles and lent a hand when needed. But over the years, those visits had become rare. Some neighbors had moved away. Others were too busy with their own lives, and Eliza had grown accustomed to handling everything alone. She had always prided herself on her independence, but now she began to wonder if pride was keeping her from seeking help when it was most necessary. She shook her head, trying to dispel the growing cloud of frustration. There was work to be done. She needed to fix the fence near the northern field before the livestock wandered off. The boards were old and weak, and the hinges were rusted. Normally she would have repaired them quickly, but today the task felt overwhelming. She lifted the first plank with care, her arms straining, and set it in place. Her legs quivered with the effort, and she had to pause to rest before continuing. Every movement was measured, calculated, and exhausting, but she refused to give up. While she worked, she reflected on how much her body had changed. In the past, she could have completed this repair in half the time, her energy steady and her strength reliable. Now she had to pace herself, listen to every ache, and anticipate every twinge. It was frustrating, but it was also a lesson. She realized that ignoring the signs of her body had brought her here. She had pushed herself for years without pause, believing that endurance alone would carry her through. Now, endurance was not enough. She needed strategy, care, and perhaps even assistance. By midday, the fence was secure, though it had taken far longer than usual. Eliza stood back to examine her work, feeling a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The fence would hold, the livestock would remain safe, and the field would be protected. Yet the effort left her body trembling and her mind heavy with thoughts of what lay ahead. There were still crops to water, weeds to pull, and a dozen smaller chores that could not be ignored. She took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the sun warm her face, and then slowly made her way to the garden. The garden was her favorite place on the farm, a small patch of green and color that offered a sense of accomplishment and peace. She knelt among the vegetables, checking for pests and gently pulling weeds. Her hands moved carefully, and her knees protested with every bend. She paused often, stretching where she could, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing. The work was slow, methodical, and tiring, but there was satisfaction in seeing the garden thrive under her care. Even as her body reminded her of its limits, her spirit found moments of joy in the small victories of the day. While tending the garden, Eliza's thoughts turned to the past. She remembered learning about plants and soil from her father, the way he had taught her to observe, to experiment, to understand the land. He had been patient and kind, guiding her hands as she learned. She realized how much of him lived in her daily work, the careful attention, the commitment, the resilience. Remembering these lessons gave her strength, even when her body felt weak. It reminded her that she was not just working for herself, but for the memory of those who had shaped her life. By mid-afternoon, Eliza's energy had begun to fade. Her legs were stiff and sore, and a dull ache had settled into her back. She knew that she could not continue at the same pace. Sitting on a small wooden stool, she closed her eyes and allowed herself a few minutes of rest. She thought about the future, about how much longer she could manage this life alone. The thought was frightening. She did not want to leave the farm, but she could not ignore the growing evidence that her body was struggling to keep up with the demands she placed on it. As she rested, a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, happened to drive past in his old pickup truck. He noticed Eliza sitting outside the garden, and he slowed down. "Eliza," he called. "Everything okay?" She forced a small smile. "Just taking a break," she replied, though the truth was more complicated. She had hoped for someone to notice, to offer help, but pride and habit made it difficult to ask outright. Mr. Apparad did not make it difficult to ask outright. Mr. Thompson parked briefly and came over, leaning on the fence. You've been working hard, he said, glancing at her tired posture. Don't push yourself too much. You need to take care of yourself, too.
Eliza nodded, appreciating his concern.
She wanted to explain, to tell him how her legs had been failing, how the pain was growing, how isolation was making every task heavier. But the words stayed in her throat. She had always handled things herself. Asking for help felt like admitting weakness, even when she knew it wasn't. After he drove away, Eliza sat quietly, considering his advice. Perhaps it was time to accept that help could be part of her life. Perhaps acknowledging her limits was not weakness but wisdom. She knew that the farm would continue to demand her effort, but she also understood that she could not do everything alone, forever. This thought was both comforting and unsettling. Change would not be easy, but perhaps it was necessary. Evening approached and Eliza moved back toward the house, each step deliberate and careful. She tended to the last chores of the day, feeding the animals once more, gathering tools, and making sure everything was secure for the night. Her body was tired, her muscles sore, but there was also a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had completed the day's work, even in the face of increasing physical challenges. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the fields, Eliza paused on the porch and looked out across her land. The farm had always been a source of pride and purpose, but now it also carried a reminder. She needed to care for herself as carefully as she cared for her animals and crops. The thought was new, almost foreign, but she embraced it. Perhaps tomorrow she would take the first step toward finding help, whether through a neighbor, a professional, or someone who could guide her in managing her pain and sustaining her farm life. Night fell and Eliza prepared a simple meal. She moved slowly, mindful of her body's limits but also resolute. She was learning in her own hard way that endurance alone was not enough. Strength required awareness, care, and sometimes reaching out. She thought about the future with cautious hope, knowing that while the road ahead would not be easy, she was ready to face it. Before going to bed, she sat by the window, looking at the stars above the fields. They were constant, silent witnesses to her life, and in their presence she felt a renewed sense of connection to the land, to the animals, to the memories of her family, and to the possibility of support and change. The day had been long, the work exhausting, but Eliza understood something important. Even in struggle, there was hope. And even in isolation, there were paths to connection and relief. With that thought, she lay down, allowing her body to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring another set of challenges, but also another opportunity to find balance, strength, and perhaps help along the way. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with the quiet determination of someone who refused to give up, no matter how heavy the burden. The morning sun spilled over the fields again, but today Eliza felt a mixture of determination and apprehension. Yesterday's encounter with Mr. Thompson had planted a thought in her mind, a thought she had avoided for too long. Maybe it was time to reach out for help. Not because she was weak, she told herself, but because strength sometimes meant knowing when to accept support. Her body had been speaking to her for months, and it was time to listen. She moved slowly as she walked toward the barn, feeling the familiar ache in her legs. It was still there, persistent, reminding her of her limits. But now it carried a different weight, an urgency that nudged her to consider solutions beyond sheer endurance. She paused at the barn door, taking a deep breath, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The farm had always demanded so much from her, and she had given it all, but perhaps she could give herself something too: care, attention, and maybe a little guidance. Eliza decided to start small. She made a list of things she could do to ease her burden. Perhaps she could hire a local worker to help with the heavy chores for a few hours each week. Maybe she could visit the town clinic to see if her pain could be treated, or at least managed better. She even considered asking neighbors for advice on less physically demanding farming techniques. Each idea made her heart race with nervousness. Asking for help was not something she had ever done, but she also felt a spark of hope. Change was possible if she took the first step. After breakfast, she walked slowly to the edge of the field where her phone signal was strongest. She had always avoided using modern conveniences too much, preferring the simplicity of farm life. But today, she typed a few tentative messages. One was to Mr. Thompson, thanking him for his concern and cautiously asking if he knew anyone who could help with farm chores occasionally. Another was to the town clinic, inquiring if a consultation could be scheduled for her ongoing leg and back pain. Sending the messages felt like climbing a steep hill, but when she pressed send, a strange relief washed over her. By late morning, a response arrived from Mr. Thompson. He suggested a young man named Daniel who lived nearby and sometimes helped neighbors with heavy farm work. Daniel was strong, reliable, and familiar with farm life. Reading the message, Eliza felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. She had always worked alone, and the idea of letting someone else assist her felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. But it also felt necessary. Maybe, just maybe, this could ease the strain on her body and give her the energy she needed to continue managing the farm she loved so much. Eliza spent the next few hours preparing for Daniel's visit. She gathered tools, made a mental list of the tasks that required extra strength, and arranged the barn and garden for easier access. Her movements were careful, measured, and slow, but there was a sense of purpose in each action. She was not just working to maintain the farm. She was preparing for a new chapter, one where she might not have to carry every burden alone. When Daniel arrived in the afternoon, he was polite, cheerful, and respectful of Eliza's space. He introduced himself, shook her hand, and listened attentively as she explained what she needed help with. At first, she felt awkward, unaccustomed to giving directions and relying on someone else. But Daniel's patience and understanding made it easier. He did not rush her, and he followed her guidance carefully, lifting and moving as she instructed. Watching him work, Eliza felt a sense of relief she had not expected. For the first time in months, the farm felt lighter, as if the weight of her responsibilities had been shared, even if only temporarily. As the afternoon progressed, Eliza observed Daniel handling the heavier tasks, the lifting of hay bales, the repair of fences, the moving of water barrels. She realized that she could focus on tasks that were less strenuous, tasks that required her knowledge and experience rather than physical strength. It was a small shift, but it was significant. She could still contribute meaningfully, but without pushing her body to the point of exhaustion. By evening, the farm was in better shape than it had been in weeks. Eliza's body was still sore, but the ache felt more manageable. More importantly, her mind felt lighter. Accepting help had not diminished her independence. If anything, it had reinforced it, allowing her to continue doing what she loved without causing herself harm. As she watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, she realized that strength was not only in endurance, but also in knowing when to share the load. That night, as she prepared her simple meal, Eliza reflected on the day. Change was uncomfortable, she admitted to herself, but it was also necessary. Her body had been speaking to her, and for the first time, she had truly listened. She realized that asking for help did not make her weak. It made her wise. She had survived long enough by pushing herself, but survival was not the same as thriving. Thriving required balance, care, and sometimes the willingness to let others step in. Over the next few days, Daniel returned regularly, helping with the most physically demanding chores. Their interactions were respectful, sometimes quiet, sometimes filled with light conversation about farming techniques, the weather, and local events. Gradually, Eliza felt a growing sense of ease in sharing her responsibilities. Her body was recovering more quickly between tasks, and her mind was clearer. She even found herself looking forward to his visits, not just for the assistance, but for the companionship. During this time, Eliza also made an appointment with a town clinic. The thought of sitting in a waiting room discussing her pain with a professional had initially made her nervous, but she reminded herself that it was a step toward care and understanding. When the day came, she walked into the clinic with Daniel accompanying her for support. The doctor listened carefully as she described her symptoms, her routine on the farm, and the challenges she faced. After a thorough examination, the doctor provided guidance, exercises, and suggestions to help manage her pain. For the first time in months, Eliza felt that there was a plan a path forward that included not just endurance, but care and knowledge. Returning home that evening, she felt a mixture of relief and hope. Her legs were sore as they always were after a day of work, but the soreness now carried the reassurance that it could be managed, that she could continue her life on the farm without being overwhelmed. Sitting on the porch, she watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. There was a quiet beauty in their presence, a reminder that even in the vastness of solitude, there was guidance, support, and constancy. In the following weeks, Eliza incorporated the doctor's recommendations into her routine. She set aside time each day for gentle stretching and strengthening exercises, and she planned her chores more carefully to avoid unnecessary strain. With Daniel's help, she managed to keep the farm in good condition while giving her body the care it needed. Slowly, steadily, she felt a renewed sense of energy and resilience. Tasks that once seemed insurmountable became manageable again. She could still rise with the sun, tend to her animals, care for her crops, and move through her daily life with purpose and intention. Perhaps most importantly, Eliza began to understand the emotional side of her journey. Pride had often prevented her from seeking help, but now she recognized that humility and openness could be powerful tools. Asking for assistance did not make her less capable. It made her capable in new ways, allowing her to continue living the life she loved while maintaining her health and well-being. She had learned that independence and support were not opposites. They could coexist, creating a stronger, more sustainable way of living. One afternoon, as she walked through the fields, her legs feeling stronger than they had in months, Eliza paused to watch the sun set over the horizon. The farm was quiet, the animals resting, the crops swaying gently in the evening breeze. She thought about the journey she had begun, not just the physical journey of managing pain, but the emotional journey of recognizing her limits, seeking help and learning to balance responsibility with care. It had been difficult, sometimes frightening, but it had also been deeply rewarding. Eliza smiled softly to herself. She was still the same woman who had grown up running barefoot through these fields, who had carried hay and lifted water buckets with determination. But she was also someone new, someone who understood the value of support, who had learned to listen to her body, and who had discovered a deeper, more sustainable form of strength. The farm had always been a part of her identity, but now it felt like a place where she could thrive, not just survive. As night fell, she returned to the farmhouse, her steps careful but confident. She prepared her meal and settled in for the evening, feeling a sense of accomplishment and calm that had been absent for far too long. Her journey was not over. There would still be challenges, pain, and hard work, but she was no longer facing them alone. She had discovered that strength could be shared, that endurance could be balanced with care, and that the farm she loved so dearly could continue to flourish alongside her renewed spirit. And so, as she drifted off to sleep, Eliza carried with her a quiet determination, a hope that the days ahead would bring not only work and responsibility, but also support, balance, and the possibility of true well-being. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the fields, painting the horizon with warm shades of orange and gold. Eliza felt a sense of calm she had not experienced in months. Her body still protested with minor aches, but the pain no longer ruled her life. She had learned to listen to it, to respect its warnings, and to manage her work in a way that allowed her both productivity and rest. The farm was still demanding, but she had discovered a rhythm that suited her, a rhythm that honored both her responsibility and her well-being. Eliza stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. She watched the animals begin their day, the chickens pecking at the ground, the cows stirring in their stalls, the horses stretching their legs and whinnying softly. A smile touched her lips as she realized how much she had missed the quiet joy of observing life around her. These simple moments, once taken for granted, now carried a profound sense of peace. She understood that caring for the farm was not just about labor. It was about connection, observation, and harmony with the life she had cultivated over decades. After a light breakfast, Eliza began her daily routine, moving through the farm with a sense of purpose and care. The difference from months ago was striking. She no longer pushed herself relentlessly, ignoring the warning signs of her body. Instead, she paced her work, alternating between tasks that required strength and those that relied on her skill and experience. With Daniel's help, The heavy lifting was easier, and with the exercises the doctor had recommended, her body felt stronger and more flexible. The combination of support, strategy, and care had transformed her life in subtle but meaningful ways. As she tended to the garden, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables, she reflected on how much had changed, not just physically, but emotionally. She had learned that asking for help did not diminish her independence. It enhanced it. By allowing others to assist her, she had created space for herself to focus on planning, problem-solving, and nurturing the aspects of the farm that required her mind more than her muscles. Her pride, once a barrier, had evolved into wisdom, guiding her choices and actions in a more sustainable way. Later in the morning, Daniel arrived as scheduled. Today, they were working on the northern field, repairing a section of the fence that had been weakened by recent storms. Eliza directed the work with clarity and confidence, knowing exactly which tasks required her guidance and which could be handled entirely by Daniel. Their collaboration had become seamless. She felt a sense of camaraderie and respect that was new but welcome. In many ways, their partnership mirrored the support system she had always needed but had never sought. While Daniel worked, Eliza paused at the edge of the field to catch her breath. The sun was bright and warm on her face. The breeze carried the scent of fresh earth, and the fields stretched endlessly before her. She thought about how far she had come, from months of pain and isolation to a life where she could still manage her farm, honor her responsibilities, and take care of herself. It was not an easy journey, nor was it without challenges, but it had been transformative. She felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that went beyond the physical labor. It was the pride of someone who had learned to balance strength with wisdom.
Independence with collaboration. After completing the fence repair, they moved to the barn to organize supplies.
Eliza demonstrated how to store tools efficiently, emphasizing safety and ease of access. Daniel followed her instructions carefully, asking questions when needed and learning from her experience. Eliza realized that sharing her knowledge was as important as receiving help. Teaching someone else not only lightened her workload, but also ensured the farm's continuity. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment in this exchange, understanding that her wisdom and experience were valuable contributions in their own right. By late afternoon, the farm was in excellent shape. The crops were thriving, the animals were content, and the fences were secure. Eliza sat on the porch, looking out at the fields, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The ache in her legs was present but manageable, a gentle reminder that her body needed care but was capable of recovery. She thought about the journey she had undertaken, from ignoring her pain to acknowledging it, from struggling alone to accepting help, from surviving to thriving. It was a journey of resilience, growth, and self-awareness. That evening, Eliza prepared a simple meal and sat down to eat, savoring the quiet of the farmhouse. She reflected on the lessons she had learned. Life on the farm would always demand effort, patience, and perseverance, but it could also offer moments of beauty, connection, and joy. By respecting her limits, seeking assistance when necessary, and nurturing both her body and mind, she had discovered a sustainable way to live fully and intentionally. After dinner, she stepped outside once more. The sky was a deep shade of indigo, stars beginning to twinkle above the fields. The night was calm, the air cool, and the farm quiet except for the occasional soft call of an animal settling in for rest. Eliza stood there for a long while, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in years. She realized that strength was not just in physical endurance, but in the courage to change, to adapt, and to embrace support without guilt. In the following weeks, this new rhythm became Eliza's routine. She continued to work the farm with intention, balancing her responsibilities with care for her own health. She followed the doctor's exercises daily, allowed herself rest when needed, and welcomed Daniel's assistance without hesitation. The physical strain was reduced, her energy levels improved, and her overall well-being had increased dramatically. More than that, she felt emotionally lighter, more confident, and more connected to the life she loved. Eliza also began to reconnect with her community in other ways. She shared her experiences with neighbors, offering advice on managing farm work safely and efficiently. She encouraged others to seek help when needed and to respect their own limits. Her openness and resilience inspired those around her, creating bonds of support and mutual understanding that had been absent in her life for too long. She discovered that vulnerability, when approached with courage and self-awareness, could strengthen relationships and foster community. One afternoon, as she walked through the garden, checking the progress of the vegetables, she thought about the future. The farm would always require effort, patience, and adaptability, but she now had a toolkit of strategies to manage both the physical and emotional demands of her life. She envisioned herself continuing to cultivate the land, tending to the animals, and growing both her crops and her personal resilience. There was still work to be done, challenges to face and obstacles to overcome, but she now felt equipped to handle them with wisdom, strength, and balance. Eliza's relationship with Daniel evolved as well. It remained professional and respectful, built on trust, communication, and mutual understanding. She valued his assistance and reliability, and he respected her knowledge and leadership. Their collaboration allowed Eliza to focus on the aspects of farm life that mattered most to her, while still maintaining the health and energy needed to thrive. It was a partnership grounded in practical necessity but enriched by respect and shared purpose. By the end of the month, the farm was flourishing, the crops were abundant, the animals healthy, and Eliza's own health and energy were at a peak she had not felt in years. She reflected on how much her life had transformed, from isolation, pain, and relentless struggle to balance, support, and sustainable growth.
It had not been an easy journey, but the lessons she had learned were invaluable.
She had discovered the power of acknowledging limitations, seeking help, and embracing change with courage and humility. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eliza walked through the fields with a sense of quiet joy. She observed the land she had nurtured for decades, the crops swaying gently in the evening breeze, and the animals resting peacefully. She felt connected to every aspect of her life, the soil, the plants, the animals, and herself. She understood that life's challenges were inevitable, but how she responded to them made all the difference. Through resilience, adaptation, and support, she had created a life that was sustainable, meaningful, and filled with hope. As night fell and stars filled the sky, Eliza returned to the farmhouse. She felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the support she had received, and for the opportunity to continue living a life rooted in the land she loved. She prepared for bed with a sense of calm and fulfillment, her body tired but strong, her mind clear and at peace. She knew that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to arise, but she was ready to face them with wisdom, patience, and courage. Lying in bed, she reflected on the path she had traveled. The pain, the isolation, and the struggles had not disappeared entirely, but they had been transformed. They had become reminders of her strength, lessons in resilience, and catalysts for growth. She felt empowered, knowing that she could manage her farm, care for her body, and seek support when needed. Her life was no longer defined solely by labor and endurance, but by balance, self-care, and the ability to thrive. Finally, as she drifted into sleep, Eliza carried with her a sense of peace, hope, and quiet pride. She had navigated the challenges of farm life, learned to honor her body and mind, and embraced the support of others without fear or guilt. The future was full of possibilities, and she was ready to meet it with strength, wisdom, and determination. Her farm, her life, and her spirit were all in harmony, a testament to the power of resilience, adaptation, and the courage to change.